Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thursday Night Saws.
Nothing too crazy. We had a little workshop hangout this past Monday, kind of grilled out and deep cleaned the skid steer, all the saws, the truck, and kind of took inventory on everything, just preparing for hurricane season. And then that's basically it. I'm preparing for a ISA presentation tomorrow, a virtual presentation. And then Saturday, I got a little climb job here locally. So trying to stay busy, and trying to stay local too for the baby. So hasn't been too crazy on my end.
So, presentation tomorrow, is that on that tree assessment?
So I did a presentation last year in August for the George Arbor Association summer workshop, and it was kind of on storm work. It was basically maintaining standards and safety while reducing response time, and so just kind of go over some of the safety stuff that we do, from a crew standpoint and sawing standpoint while responding to storms, but then also a little bit of some resources to use in the field to kind of forecast when severe weather might take place and kind of understanding how to prepare your team in order to have a swift response. So they really liked it, and they suggested that I send an abstract in for the ISA conference here in Atlanta, the international conference that's in August. And
Mhm.
so I did, and they accepted for a virtual presentation. So it gets me a free ticket at least.
Yeah. Well, that's a
But
chunk nowadays.
yeah, it is. I kind of saw the prices. I was like, man, I probably wouldn't be able to go without being able, doing this presentation.
Uh, well, I'm sure you do a good job at it.
I
I,
appreciate it.
I had the video I had with you in last week. I had another one that I put together called "Pull and Fall Backwards." And right now, I posted it yesterday morning or night before last, and it's 38,000 or so
Oh
out there.
wow,
I've got some interesting comments back in off of that I thought we had discussed tonight.
yeah, that sounds good.
Sound coming good through good?
Sounds good.
Yeah. I'll play that video and let you. I don't guess you've seen it yet.
No, I haven't seen it yet. That'd be good.
Let's see here. Humboldt too many times people cut into the middle of the tree. Cutting in the face notch that far gives you some advantage on a big tree. It gives you less advantage though on a tree that has backlean. And I think that's the reason why a lot of times people really drive the wedges, or they'll maybe even do a back cut and then cut the face notch, which to me is it's not necessary. But it's something to where start your back cut and you've got your hinge in the middle. You have to have a lot of power to lift there. Whereas if it's on the other side, it's a slower lift, but you have more mechanical advantage over the lift of the tree. That's something a lot of people don't realize. And the other thing is that if you've got the hinge in the middle, whether it's back lean, forward lean, or whatever, if there's any movement of the tree, it starts to pull fiber in a very expensive part of the log. I kind of call it more entertainment than anything else. But as we think through 1 minute's time, I try to get as much in there as possible. It definitely creates some interest. Like I say, it's several thousand that's checked in on it, and the majority of them this time were fairly positive. I had the let's see, is Banchero Family Tree Service. He says the ANSI best practices says cut in until your face shows 80% of the wood inside the bark. And if you've got a perfectly cylinder or circular tree, that means your face cut only needs to go in 20%, about 25% if you're including the bark. So what's your comments on that? What do you think?
I guess if you're looking at it, like I guess the way he's saying, if you're looking at it head on, you basically have what 10% of the diameter on either side of the length of the face cut. If you're looking at it head on, I guess is kind of what he's getting at. I do know the Z133 says, pulling it up here, I believe it says no more than a third into the face. I was trying to find it real quick, but
I see a lot of it, I've heard over the years a quarter to a third, basically what we've used, and that's kind of what he's talking about there. We've always talked about 80% of the diameter of the tree, breast height, DBH. 80% of that diameter being the minimum length of the hinge, and you want good fiber, so inside the bark would probably be the way to state that. The reason why we use percentages was always because trees aren't shaped round.
That's right.
You've got different growth around the base. You got flared butts. You got all this kind of stuff that you want to try to get kind of a figure in straight fiber. And then as you get lower to the ground, usually you've got more length of the hinge that's available there than that 80%. So if you figure 80% DBH, then you'll very easily be able to get 100% of that dimension at the base. And we've always said that 80% is really a minimum, and then a 10% thickness being a maximum. And that gives you a pretty good control fiber as long as you've got good fiber. What did you find something there?
Yeah, it's this is section 8.6.13, which is the tree removal section where it kind of goes into the felling. But the 8.6.13.4 says notch depth should not exceed 1/3 the diameter of the tree. That's kind of says the notch cut shall be an open face notch, a conventional notch, or a Humboldt. Yeah, it doesn't really say anything else as far as face notch depth, but
that's we use a percentage because of the different shapes of the tree. You can call it the way that you want to do it. But I made the statement in there that most of the time what I see on Humboldt is it's closer to a half end. Very seldom do you see a quarter. Most of the time they're either a third to a half. And most of the videos that I watch, most of the time the guys are going into close to a half. But as I said, that my answer back to them, and I guess we've got Chris and Jason and John's on here now.
Sir.
Did you guys hear the question? I had came back in. ANSI best practices says cut in until your face shows 80% of the wood inside the bark, and if you've got a perfectly circular tree, that means your face cut only needs to go in 20%, about 25% if you're including the bark.
Yeah, I always do that 80%, just like what you're saying, that it's very rare that you have a tree that's round. So that 80 works all around the board, whether the tree's oddly shaped or if it is round, you're still getting the same results.
Yeah, you get into different like hardwood trees. Soren always used to say that with a hardwood tree, you can pretty much plan it's going to be kind of flat on its leaning direction side, because hardwoods kind of build up from the back side. Douglas fir, redwood stuff is very similar to that too, because they grow out of clumps, and a lot of cases you've got a lot more roots on the backside, or either it's down a steep incline and you've got build up on the leaning side. And so if you do have flat, you don't have to cut in quite so far to get 80%. So that's the concept that we've always used of looking at that. And I wrote back to it and said that's pretty much what we've used for years. A percentage is used because most trees are not perfectly round. The concept is you need a hinge long enough to control and keep side weight connected during the fall. 80% we always said was a minimum length with 10% thickness as a maximum. Those are usually calculated at DBH, diameter breast height. So it's calculated in straight fiber, and you can search many videos at Forest Apps on YouTube, and explains a lot about the notch and the hinges. It's very hard to get a lot through, and a lot of people get all miscombobulated because they try to watch 30 seconds of a 1 minute video, and they first turn red and get all mad and all this kinds of stuff. But if they really sit back and think a little bit about it, then would kind of explain itself, or go over and look at some of the others, because all of the videos that I post with the 1 minuters, you go over and you've got at least 6 to 10 to 30 minutes worth of actual video for training purposes over on the YouTube site. How you doing, John?
Doing well. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah.
I didn't know how. I tried to get on their Wi-Fi and it was worse than my service, so I'm trying my service right now.
Yeah.
But you talk about that 80% rule. what we've done about 16 trees in the last 2 days, Chris, with the trainees.
Yes,
and
sir.
and none of the trees have been perfectly round, and so that throws the people off really fast when they start thinking about that 80% and looking at it. And in some of these trees we actually had 80% on one side and maybe even 85 to 90 on another side, just because of the way the direction that we picked created, you had to put your face notch in there, and so it was kind of like you say, they're weird shapes, so it's different when you get in there and actually put us all in the tree and start looking at it.
Mm-hmm. And as we've discussed before, a straight tree, the length of the hinge is not that critical. But when you have a side weight that you're dealing with, side lean, the longer the hinge, the more support you have against the side lean. That's really where the 80% is a minimum to be able to make sure that you've got enough length of the hinge, just like a hinge on a door, to be able to support the weight of the door. A piano hinge all the way down the door is definitely stronger than what you would have with one or two hinges hung around on it, And so that's the reason why we've always looked at, if you've got 100%, and it's 20 inches, you want to at least try to get a 16-inch, length of hinge. If you've got a 6-foot diameter tree at 72, then you're looking at 80% of that. When you start thinking through that, that's to support the side weight, and your depth into the tree oftentimes dictates that because of the shape of the tree, and then you've got to also be able to find good fiber there too. And then Elk Ridge Timber says, your opinion really shows your lack of experience, and honestly, what makes you a qualified expert? And I said, what makes you a professional is the same as me, I guess, your history. And mine's been pretty good since 1981. But people start talking about stuff, and they don't know the history. I don't know his, he don't know mine, and you start looking through it, but it doesn't change the being able to put together a plan and having a technique that is productive as well as maintaining safety. And experience doesn't make you safe. It's having a plan that you have formulated into experience. Another one, Dandy Bandy 2, I guess, exactly. I don't understand why people cut such big face notches. And I don't know what he's talking about I guess the depth back into it or whatever, if you look at that. And when you really, the important part there is, and I wrote back to him, thanks for commenting, good song to you. And another one, Scott Wessel says, I'm a fan of a small notch. You have way more control with a small notch. And, I listened to those two, and I really don't know exactly where they're coming from either. They don't explain themselves very well. Like when you start to think about what's a big notch versus a small notch, is he talking about the depth of the notch, or is he talking about the opening of the notch? Because the depth of the notch, you can be able to get that 80% or a third in, in a lot of different ways, but you've got to be able to have an opening enough to allow that hinge to work, or either you're going to get pulled fiber or some splitting is going to start to take place. And that's what I had in the video last week, is a lot of people don't realize the splitting starts to happen whether you're in the middle of the tree or on the edge of the tree. If the hinge is too thick, or you've got too much pulling when the face notch closes, you're going to lose some quality there. So thanks for commenting, Scott. And then next guy, Mr. J.R. Mahaffey, he says, how much timber have you fallen when the logs are paying your bills? And I guess I have to say that I've felt a good bit of timber paying my bills over the years. He says the second question is, would mirror that, but how many board feet west of the Continental Divide? And not as much as the east. That's definitely true, but I have done some up there. And I said none, I guess, if that makes a difference. But trees, chainsaws, professionals have paid my bills since '81, so my history speaks for itself. He said, it makes a difference. Cutting down trees in Mrs. Johnson's yard is a far cry from going out and manufacturing 200 stumps a day. If he's doing 200 stumps a day, I'm going to say he's got a nice fella buncher. But if he's in the big trees like he says he is, he says, why don't you stick with yard trees and not even make mention of valuable wood? So, it doesn't make any difference how valuable the wood is if somebody gets killed doing it. Your profits kind of go down pretty fast. I told him, I said, I've worked with a lot larger operations than yours, and most are not as set in their ways. And you have a choice not to watch my videos, and there are a lot of professionals that do, but good sawing to you. The timber tramp has some good questions. It says, makes sense, but I don't see how the Humboldt fits into this. And because my comment of the Humboldt being close to half in, and actually the one that I showed on the video, I got off of YouTube, and it's really a 70-degree Humboldt that he has on there. So that one works like an open face. It's just inverted. I said the Humboldt is only one type of notch used in tree work. It's a choice. So to be able to choose, you have to know options, and so that's true. And he says, I get that. I use them for different reasons, but what does it have to do with depth? And so, a Humboldt that's 10 or 15 degrees open, you're most likely going to get pull no matter where you're at. You got to sit there with it to be able to take the hinge off or any fiber off that's going to pull. It's not that it's a Humboldt or an open face or a common notch. If you don't have enough movement for that tree to get to about a 70-degree position, you're going to get some pulled fiber and possibly even splitting. And I said that the Humboldt is usually made close to half the diameter of the stump. This can be critical sometimes with back-leaning trees, because as you start to cut in deeper, you if wedging, have a faster movement with the wedge, but it takes a lot more power. And this is something that I think we touched on a little bit last week, is that if you don't have a hinge that's bendable, what happens is you put a wedge in the back of the tree. It's just going to start shaking the tree basically. And I watch guys, they drive the wedges in the back, and you don't even see the gap, the kerf growing much. And so what's it doing? Well, it's sitting there stretching the fibers at whatever hinge dimension they have. And then you see them put the saw back in there and start cutting towards the face notch, and the tree goes. Well, did it have back lean? I mean, if you put wedges in the back and you don't see any movement in the kerf, it's not tilting the tree. You're not springing the tree. So basically, when you remove the hinge and it goes over, what does that tell you? It had forward lean to begin with in most cases. And there's nothing wrong with putting the wedge in there to actually make sure that it doesn't sit back on your saw. There's no doubt about that. But sitting there and drive it all the way in and double stack, and it hasn't moved hardly anything in the kerf, is a little bit more work and a waste of time. I wrote the depth is discussed with common and open face notches in most cases, but not the Humboldt. If you watch videos and listen over the years, everyone has a different idea on the Humboldt. And he wrote back, says most of the documentation, or I said most of the documentation is from the U.S. Forest Service. However, the Humboldt wasn't really taught in their training. And he says, well, I came from the Forest Service, and they always taught the 1/3 rule unless it had no top weight, then it was half. And heavy leaners being less. And they touched on the Humboldt, but it really came down to who your teacher was. And I was up near Southern Oregon, so almost everything was done with a Humboldt. And I didn't have anyone explain that a Humboldt would be done deeper. So, the thing with the Humboldt, you're going to have higher stumps, which that didn't work too well in the East, but a lot of it is pretty commonplace in the West. If you go into about 1/3, you're going to have about the same, process in the diameter of the log. And so then it would just be up to how much hinge that you leave. And that would be what would cause any pulled fiber, or definitely as that face notch closes. If you've got a Humboldt that's 40 degrees, or you've got a Humboldt that is 70 degrees, then that's going to make a difference. I mean, basically a Humboldt that's 70 degrees or more is an open face. It's just inverted. But one thing that starts to add up there is if you use less than a 70 degree, and even the Forest Service is teaching that also. If the guys on the West preferred the Humboldt, as long as, and that's what we talked about to take the name out of it in the training classes, is talk about what does the notch do? How open should it be to allow the hinge to work? A Humboldt less than 70 degrees should have what? What should less than a 70 degree face notch have, whether it's open face or common or Humboldt?
Bump stop.
It should have a stump shot.
Bump stop. Yeah.
And
Bump
so
stop.
that you'd have to have a stump shot, and you have very few times that you see the better trees with the Humboldts that are utilizing a stump shot. So they're usually trying to be as level to the notch as possible, and that's what we've always taught, is to be as level as possible. But the prerequisite for that would be a 70-degree face notch or more. And so I said, the issue is not how far in. The thought process that's important is how open the notch is. And the depth is more towards length of hinge importance. And I worked with Pete Duncan with the U.S. Forest Service, who was the National SAW Director, and worked with the 26 regional U.S. Forest Service SAW instructors. And I was a Class C faller Class C faller instructor for many years. And go watch some of the YouTube videos at Forest Apps, and the 1-minute videos on IG are not much in the way of training. And you start to think through some of the processes, and I'm gonna let y'all talk a little bit here, what's going on. But thinking about today, I was watching most all the D-Day presentations from Normandy and all, and you listen to the guys who are out there in the field, and they definitely had an experience, and most of them were 16, 17, 19 years old, went through heck out there on the beach, and they were talking about how a lot of the people that they talk to nowadays, they try to tell them the stories, but they don't even know about World War II. They don't understand what they went through, because nobody teaches it in a school anymore. Nobody talks through stuff like that anymore. And I sit there and I got to thinking, it's the same thing. Nobody's ever heard of Soren Erickson, or they've never heard of the Forest Service history, and Steve Conway and his efforts on the West with some of the first books on large tree falling, and Don Blair with the large trees and those kind of things. It's something where people don't know, but they have formed their own life. There's no doubt, but they become closed to the stories. They become closed to the history. I think is a huge downfall in the logging industry, as well as a lot of times in the tree care. I think tree care has become light years ahead because of all the different tools and apparatus and the different innovations with so many people in it. Loggers being out and about and not really part of it. I think a lot of times the associations have had something to do with it. I used to always say, you had the different logging associations around, and they would, national ones anyway, would have some pretty nice meetings going to Hawaii or Puerto Rico or Costa Rica or something like that, or down to Miami or Orlando for the week or whatever. But you never saw people that are on the handles. And so it was always somebody that was one of the directors or one of the vice presidents or presidents of the organizations or companies. I think we need to strive more about getting the people in the field, the ones with the handles, the hands on the handles, and letting them see and understand a lot of the information. And it's not Tim Ard techniques. It's something where a lot of it was brought to the States, and the excitements were there because of a relationship that Soren had with the mills and the paper companies nationwide. Getting that information out there, those that would come to the trainings and participate, it's spread all over throughout chainsaw operations in several industries. And so that's kind of it. But these things, they don't keep me up at night, so it didn't make a difference what they say. And I've had a couple of them that I've kind of unpinned, but it's guys who have a lot of things, and it's a lot more traffic on Instagram with logging and tree care in these 1-minute sessions, and a lot of it is promotion, a lot of it is advertisement for their work, and that's good. But when it comes down to understanding techniques and all, I think there needs to be some emphasis put back on YouTube or another format to be able to give some more time to it. I got a neat thing here that Chris thinking, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize is there's a lot of people out there with running chainsaws that are having to take storm stuff off of power lines and hung trees and those kinds of things. And did that picture come through? Can you see it?
It did.
Yeah, I can see it.
That's pretty cool. And this is a class that we started working with several years ago. This is a practice line for the linemen. They have to take the lines down and put them up, and practice building poles and this kind of stuff. They go through extensive training. And one of the things that we got involved with several years ago is the chainsaw portion of it. In other words, these guys go out after a storm or somebody runs into a pole and knocks it down on the side of the highway. They've got to go out and get the power back on so the meters start spinning again. And the guys go out and they've got a chainsaw or a handsaw, and they've got to get this clear. They have an option. They could drop the lines down and pull them out from underneath the tree, or they can take and take the tree off of the line. And in many cases, it's big trees that's going to have the lines pinned down close to the ground. And first of all, let me say that if you have a tree that's close to a line, call the power company. Don't sit there and think about you can cut it off, because wood does conduct electricity. So it's something that you don't want to do this on a live wire. So when these guys go in after a storm, they first disconnect or ground the lines, and then they have to figure out how to get that wind-thrown tree off of that line. And so that's what Chris and John was working with them, I guess, today. Is that right?
Yeah, we did a demo. We two trees. I walked the first trainee through it, and then I thought it was a good opportunity for John. So John worked the second trainee through it just as a demo. They had two of their safety guys there to kind of see this process. And I think they're going to, reach out to Laura sometime about potentially getting us to come on the line training. So their eyes with that open face notch on the top, kind of aiming the base of the tree to get the top to follow the sag, and we slid them right off of there today. It was cool.
Yeah. So did that one? I mean, that one's good halfway across. Is that one still stood back up and came back on the right side of the picture there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's something that the technique involves notches and hinges. And most of the time people go up, they might put a line on it, they might whack it down, they might use an offset cut, pull the line, tip line, use a machine to hold it if they have one. Yeah, but when you look at this, the real key to the techniques that we're teaching is looking at notches and hinges. And to get a notch and a hinge to work on there, you've got to have a notch open enough with no Dutchman, no bypass, and you've got to be able to get the hinge down thin enough to where it starts to bend. And it's amazing how you can take and start at the butt of that tree and start sectioning it down and walk it around to be able to spin that tree off of the line. And a lot of it is that the weight is going to seek the sag of the line in between the poles. And so it actually helps to roll it right off of it. But the prerequisite to this is a good planning process. You have to look for side to side, up and down, and back and forward, and think about balance points and pivots. But then after that, you've got to be able to make a good notch. Whether it's home bolt or open face or whatever, you've got to think about that notch has to be set up properly so that you're cutting a nice straight hinge behind it. And that's just like cutting quality logs. That's like falling quality trees, is thinking through that process of understanding how that notch and hinge works. If you don't understand that, you can't work with that. And that's a technique that we started off using with hung trees. If something got hung up or after a storm there was stuff that was hanging, then that technique was a way that we were able to work them down. A lot of power companies haven't ever experienced this. This is a power company in Mississippi that's been around for years. I imagine today was the first time that the guys had actually seen that technique.
It is. Yeah, first time.
I had been down there twice before, and we didn't have the lines set up. They moved out to a different area, which was great. It worked out for the demonstration today. But I definitely showed them a hung tree. And a hung tree is the same process. But That's just like if you go to the woods and you're watching somebody out west or you're watching somebody in the east. One person does it this way, one person does it that way, but they don't tend to explain how they do it or why they do it. And it's kind of like show me and it'll go. But if you're going to be able to pass along that information, you've got to be, first of all, understanding those basics of how each one of those notches works. It's like, a lot of times guys will tell me, well, I don't cut that way. Well, I don't know. I mean, have you looked at this type or that type? No, I've always used this one. This is the way I like it, and this kind of stuff. Well, that's great. But, like I always tell them, I can do all three of them. I can set it up anyway. I know how to work all three of them. So if you're going to be out there and you come across different situations, it's like Soren always used to say, it's not an assembly line. It's not the same thing works on every tree. And a lot of the guys, I know that. I've been doing this for years. I've cut thousands of trees. I understand how to do that. And that's rightfully so. But now if you've got a new person that starts with you, how do they learn it? If you can't explain it to them correctly, then it puts them in jeopardy. And that's part of the reason why that I do and Forest Applications does what they do and the game of logging instructors have done what they've done is trying to reduce accidents and injuries. Because the important thing is, and I guarantee you talk to half the people out there that own a logging operation or they're a contractor to the logging operation, you're going to be talking about 2 or 3 on the crew or whatever that's no good, or either I can't find somebody to do the work that I want to do. And it's the same thing in tree care. And so when you start to look at why is that, is because we forgot about the history. We forgot about what those guys on the beach had to go through to be able to get back home safely. And it's so important that we consider those things out there. So you can tell me you're professional and I'll believe it when I see it. And you can't say that I'm not professional because you haven't seen me either. So, but it's something where our industries have to get a lot more open-minded if we're going to be able to keep it going for years and years. But that's my opinion. What do you think, John?
One of the young guys.
Hey, Keith.
One of the young guys.
Go ahead, John.
You hear me?
I got you.
One of the young guys today told me, I say young, he's probably in his 20s, but he told me, he said, usually what we do on a hung tree is we just cut it and run, and we're not really sure where it's going to go. And, after showing them that, and now, granted, some of the ones he showed me pictures of, I mean, some of these trees have it pinned almost all the way to the ground. So, they're cutting some tops out and they're not sure where those tops are going to go. And so after showing them that the way to set up that hinge and release that and leave part of that hinge till it starts moving, it began to click in his mind of like, well, I mean, if my hinge is aiming this way, that thing's going to flip off and go where the hinge is telling it to go, even if it does snap, with that pressure. So it clicked in his brain and you could just tell his eyes lit up like, oh man, now I don't have to worry about it hitting me in the back, when I'm getting out of the way, because it's going to flip the way that the hinge is actually showing it to flip. So it was very, very, very valuable for them today to see that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lots of information out there. And program that came about was not Tim Ard techniques. It's adapting what loggers have used for years to be able to get down hung trees, especially in Scandinavia. And be able to utilize really on the line. It's easier than in a hung tree situation because the line actually helps to lift. But if you just whack it off, you don't know where it's going to go. But with that notch and hinge, you're able to move the butt in the direction that you need it to go, to move the top in the opposite. And so it's pretty cool to be able to look at how that works.
I think we were able to move that last tree we did about 9 or 10 feet, to one side before it started rolling off. They liked, even them seeing that just was amazing to them.
Warren, any comments on that?
Not too much. I was, browsing Instagram late at night and watching some tree videos and watching those guys take some trees off the lines, kind of doing what John was saying that group would do before learning the hinge, the face notch and hinge technique, where they just kind of cut it and let it go. And saw some pretty sketchy sketchy stuff. The guy's like even standing downhill and he's got a pole saw and he's like, trying to stretch himself away, and a tree still chases him down the hill, comes flying off the line and does like 30 cartwheels. So yeah, no, I think there's a lot of people out there that don't appreciate that technique. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. No, I agree. I agree with everything you guys are talking about, using that technique to steer it. I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, I think I got it off. Can you hear me okay?
A little bit.
We got you.
Appreciate it. Honestly, Tim, I think a lot of people, they take the Missouri approach. They just don't believe anything until they see it. And with tree guys, they got to see it about a half dozen times before it starts to register with them that hinge actually does steer, it does bend and direct the tree. And I think there's a lot of people who've never learned how to trust that hinge material, and they still think you do a real big fat hinge, you got to break it off. And this week I had a dead tree that had 10 feet of side lean. It was about a 34-inch white oak that had hardly any bark left on it, and I thought for sure it was going to be as punky as all get out. And I plunged it from the bad side. I went under the lean, trying to fall it sideways, and I plunged the front side, set my wedge on the bottom side, and plunged from the top, got my hinge set, come out the back, and I aimed this tree toward another tree thinking that would break off, because I was confident.
Chris, you have any comments?
Oh man, it's cool to see the light bulb go off teaching on the line training. I love seeing the guys when they get it, like John was talking about. You see their eyes light up, and they think, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Knowing what the tree is going to do before I put the saw into the tree, rather than just starting to cut and see what happens. Coming up with a plan, looking at the leans, looking at the hazards, looking at all those things, which way is it going to roll, and figure all of those things out. And how do I need to cut this to keep myself safe? It's really fun to train.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last week. The guys were saying, well, you got to stay there and cut the hinge off if you've got, close proximity to trees. You got to be able to roll them down into it. I did a little video and we talked about it last week, to where if you think about it, if you know that it's going to be a tight shot, first of all, you try to aim to the middle of it, or if not, you can actually set a small hinge on one side, larger hinge on the other side, and as it hits, it's going to break and spin, but you don't have to be there to do it. You set it all up. And people, oh, it's too slow. It's too slow. No, it's not. Your brain thinks a lot faster than you're going to be able to cut that tree. And so if you have the concept or the plan in your head, you're able to take and be able to execute it on that stump, release the tree, and get out of there. And if it's a forward leaner, you got a tag in the back. If you got jack it up, then you put the tree, the wedge in the back, and you drive it till it moves. But your hinge is already set up. I was talking about that earlier with Warren. Is you see guys, and there's many of them on YouTube. Big tree out west. And you see the guys are putting 2 wedges in there, and they drive them in, and then they stack the wedges and they start driving. And the kerf, you can look at it, the kerf hasn't hardly even moved. So what's happening there? You got 2 inches of wedge drove in the back, and you still got a 3/4 inch or a 1/2 inch kerf there. They're driving it and driving and driving, and they put the saw back in there and they cut, and then the tree goes. And what that tells me is that the wedges really didn't do anything. The thing had forward lean to begin with. And that's an issue also, is so many times, as you said, people just start cutting and then run, they don't know how to read lean. And I guess I'm getting a little bit hardened on some of the concept there, but it's amazing how many people risk a lot out there and then damage a lot of valuable timber and property and a lot of bodies where people are injured because of not understanding a simple planning process. It's been around for ages.
Long story short, I cut a big tree down. I thought for sure the hinge would break before it got to the ground. And so I aimed it toward another tree, and it was a 34-inch white oak with 10 foot of side lean, very heavy heat, and 1-inch hinge. Took that 70-foot tree and laid it straight into the other tree. The hinge didn't give a bit. until the face closed, and it popped the hinge, and then it went down. So I then had to do exactly what Chris and them were doing, do notches and hinges and make about 3 cuts to get the tree to come the rest of the way down. But you have to trust that hinge. You got to be willing to cut it and let it do its mechanics and let it bend, let it do the work that it's meant to do. And I think a lot of people just don't ever grasp that concept of how flexible that material is if you let all that weight do the work.
And a lot of times people don't realize how strong that material is. You know, when you start to think about a 2-inch by 16-inch hinge, I mean, that's a pretty good size board. I mean, that's bridge timber almost, you know. And so you start thinking about how strong that is, and it doesn't always take that 10%. I mean, we talk about 10% in the thickness of the hinge, but usually in most cases you're going to end up with 5 or so, you know. It has to be bendable, and that's what I'm saying. If you put wedges in the back and your hinge is too thick, you're doing nothing except for stretching that material that you've got left. And also it causes the top of the tree to shake a lot more too. When you've got that much wood fiber that's still attached, if you do get wedges in there and you hitting on them, it's shaking a good bit of the top. And so a lot of times struck bys come out from that case. But it's important to think about that hinge has to be bendable to get it to move. So if you calculate in your head on that particular tree in that particular area what you need to steer it without pulling a lot of material, you set it up to that. And then if you drive the wedge, it tilts easy. You don't have to work so hard at it. Or if it has forward lean, you can release with the back, and you're out of there. You don't have to be there trying to think that you're steering that tree. You know, I think that a lot of times guys in the woods and even up the tree, they don't have a position that they can see exactly what's going on there. But if you've got somebody that's watching you, or you're watching somebody, in that case, there's a lot of times that you can see things that are going on that, you know, they're I call it pucker factored so much that cutting fast to get out of there, and they don't understand that they set it up. And then when the tree goes over, they say, oh, you know, that one split or that one pulled or whatever. And I think that's one of the advantages too of going to a training class workshop, is that you can see those stumps once they go down, and you've got people that have varied amounts of experience, and so some of them go good, some of them go bad, and you can actually see how that fiber is reacting to that particular cut or that particular technique, and also that particular wood type. And like I always say, it's not the species as much as it is that particular tree in that area. And so, you know, you see what hollow trees do. You see what doty trees do. You see what rot does. You see what dried stuff does. You know, and so you get a lot better understanding. Whereas if you're out there, you know, trying to get the truck loaded, you don't always recognize those things. And in many cases, those are the surprises that end up with the not being able to finish that load that day.
I guess it was yesterday, cut his back strap too thin and it sat down. And just the strength.
Talk about that one. That was cool.
So, I mean, you've been here 100 times, Tim. I was watching, and John's right beside the kid, set up his back strap. He just cut way too far back. And it was a back lean, or had maybe 2 or 3 foot of back lean. So it just collapsed the back strap before he could get a wedge in it. And, I mean, when you talk about this, when you're looking at a tree and you got blocks stacked on top of each other, the tree's probably 80 feet tall. So it just moved 3/8 of an inch, that kerf set down, but the top moved a huge amount. And all the trainees are standing back looking. To me, every time something doesn't go exactly to plan, it's a great training opportunity. So John and I were able to explain just what you were saying with that hinge. I mean, it was only probably an 18-inch diameter tree. Was it that big, John?
Yeah, 15, 16, something like that. Yeah.
So I mean, you got an 1.5 by 16 inches of pine board. That hinge has a tremendous amount of strength, and it set back pretty hard, but it held. And we were still able to make it.
He thinned one side of it out to almost 3/4 though. So even that one side had 3/4 of an inch of a hinge, and it was still holding that tree up.
Yeah,
that's what he that whole tree scared me just a little bit. But we was able to put a line in it. We couldn't ever get our wedges back in, but
So
was
you got it
able to put
over
a
right
line
or
in it and
not?
pull it over.
We couldn't get the wedges to
But
get
the
it.
two
It
guys
was
on the
back
line
deep.
pulled it over.
We just took a throw line, set a half-inch line, and I had two guys pull, and then they were able to get the wedges in it and send it in the right direction. But it was cool for them to see. Those guys were amazed. All of them were amazed that that hinge would take that much pressure.
I think we see that quite often. The key there, though, is to get the wedge in there tight enough. But a lot of times, and smaller trees are much more dangerous than the big ones. And
Yeah.
that's something that with the large trees out west and stuff, you've got a lot of struck by situations with limbs and deadwood and stuff like that coming down as the tree starts to move because you just got billions of limbs on there. But when you look at dead pines in the eastern United States and stuff, or green pines in the eastern United States, in smaller diameters, that's some of the toughest ones that you can get because you've got a foot diameter to base, but 85 to 100 feet tall. You've got a lot of what we call segments in that tree, more than what you would have with a 200-foot tall tree with 6-foot base. It's amazing what you can do with it, but you've got to make sure that you've got everything in your plan working correctly. So
We had a really interesting one too that had a little bit of, but about 2 foot of forward lean, probably it may have been a 22 or 23. I think it may have been a little bit bigger it's probably 22, 23 inch diameter. And we were going to do a delayed back strap on it where you leave your back strap, but you cut down lower, 5 or 6 inches lower, and let it pull that fiber over and going over. And so he had set up one side of the hinge and then moved over to start, and he left his trigger kind of, I guess you would say, on one, not in the direct back, but on one side. And then when he began to cut in to set up his hinge on the other side, when he come back around, as he was cutting, setting up that hinge, you could see the tree starting to move already before we even did anything. And he ended up, he was probably 5% trigger instead of 10%. It ended up pulling that whole side out of that tree out of the ground. It pulled it, every bit of it up. We need to take a picture of that one tomorrow, Chris, if you didn't get one.
Yeah, I didn't get a picture of it.
So how much forward lean did it have?
Man, it probably had 5 or 6.
So you had a lot more wood holding on one side than the other, you said?
No, we had, it was such a thin, it didn't give us time to do a delayed trigger. So it just pulled from the top of that stump all the way down into the ground. I may have lost you this. Did I lose y'all?
No, we got you.
Yeah, I think a picture would help you,
basically-
but it literally pulled. It was about that. It was probably about a 10 or 12 inch strip all the way down into the ground. It pulled the bark off that tree and fell over with it.
It didn't have any limbs on the one side. Every limb of the tree was on the left side, forward. Every limb. So it had no limbs on the back. It was all forward, and it was tall and big around.
How much side lean?
So none, almost no side lean. So what happened? He cut his back. He left his back strap so thin that the tree just pulled.
Oh, it pulled
it
up the
just
back
pulled-
side.
It
Not
pulled
the
up the back.
Yeah, kind of on the.
I got you.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
direct back, but backside.
So it pulled the root and the strap off the back all the way up.
Yeah, we're standing there talking about it, and you could see the curve is open and open and open and open. And I said, "Man, get back, get back! It's going." And then that tree was holding; those flowers were holding, and then all of a sudden, it just ripped it all the way out of the ground.
But
And
it
he-
still went with the face notch and the hinge?
Yeah,
It broke that one side out where it pulled that out of the ground, and I think he was a little thick in the middle, if my memory serves me correctly. I've seen so
Yeah.
many today, get my brain mixed up with them, but that was just amazing that how that weight of that pulled all that out.
What we're talking about here is very important, and that you have a plan. Every plan doesn't go exactly right. There's no doubt, but the key there is to go back and more or less review, your plan versus the results, and that's where you pick up a lot. Too much lean or not enough lean, or too much diameter or rot, or too much hinge, not enough hinge, all that kind of stuff does when you go back and you reevaluate. It only takes a couple seconds to do it. If you know exactly what the plan was in your head or what you're going to do on the tree, and that's where we want to use the 5 steps. You know exactly what your plan is on the tree. When you go back after the tree is down, it's very easy and very quick to reevaluate and know exactly pretty much what happened. Or you're going to have some you can't explain, but in most cases, it's going to be explainable. Well, gentlemen, we've about knocked an hour out here, so I appreciate y'all dropping in tonight. If you would, keep your eyes and ears open for any questions, make note of them, and send them to me so we can get them in there next Thursday and be able to make sure that we have some, and any pictures and video and stuff like that you have. I had a friend from years and years ago, David Johnston. He was up in Illinois with some of the logger programs and stuff years ago, and he sent me a whole disk drive yesterday with I don't know, I think it was about 4 gigabytes of video on there that he has shot over the years, and he's got a tree farm and everything. He's got a YouTube site also. I want to take and be able to utilize a lot of that material. He's got some really good video there. So we're going to be able to put together some things there, and you guys, shoot stuff out there as you're doing stuff, because it makes it a lot easier to be able to talk about it and put it into stuff that people need to see. We'll see you guys next week, and appreciate y'all dropping by, and we will be hanging out here if you need to talk to me. Good song to you.
That sounds good.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
Sam.
Thanks.